Okay, it's 8 minutes after 9, and as always, on Tuesday morning, we like to bring in one of the lawyers from FH&P to talk about various concerns that people have out there in what can be a big, old, mean old world. And tonight, or rather this morning, we're going to talk about something that we hear so much about. Colin Flannigan is with us, by the way, one of the lawyers at FH&P. Every day, it seems that the news is filled with some sort of fraud or a scam that is, in particular, targeting seniors, trying to dupe them out of their money, and it just keeps getting worse and worse. It seems. Is that kind of an accurate statement?
Well, first, thanks for having me, Gord. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's one of these unfortunate circumstances that does happen. So, we do see it a lot, and I think it's something that's worth addressing because we can talk a little bit about what are some of these types of scams or frauds that seem to be aimed at some of these members of our community, as well as what we can do maybe for some preventative measures, or even what to do if it does happen to you. And I think one of the first things I want to start with is I want to remove the stigmatism on it. I mean, a lot of people, when they first come to me, they're almost a little bit embarrassed about sort of being targeted. Even if they haven't given any information, even if they haven't given away any money, they still feel this level of embarrassment that, hey, I was actually targeted by fraud.
I was conned. I was, I think of myself as a fairly reasonably smart person, and yet this guy conned me. Yeah, it's embarrassing. I understand that.
Well, and that's the thing. I don't think it should be embarrassing.
No.
I think we should remove that stigmatism and start looking at it and say, look, there's nothing wrong with you for being targeted. There's nothing wrong with falling for it because guess what? It happens to a lot of people. People that this does happen to, you're a victim. There's nothing wrong. You're not stupid. You're not unintelligent. There's nothing wrong. There's no particular reason why it happened to you. You need to remove that feeling that you did something wrong. Bear in mind, someone else did this to you. You're the victim. And I think we need to start from that standpoint and understand, hey, it does happen.
In many cases, some of these fraudsters are depending on your embarrassment and depending on your silence to perpetrate their scam.
Exactly, and that's how they become more successful at it. So I think the more awareness we have about it, the better equipped we are to deal with it.
Okay. Now, what kind of scams are out there? We know about some of them. We know about the, hello, I'm from Revenue Canada, send us a check immediately, or you're going to go to jail. That happened to my mother.
Yeah, and that one is very popular, particularly in the springtime as we get closer towards what's known as tax season.
Tax time, yeah.
Exactly. And that is a very popular scam. So the list I'm going to give is not meant to be an exhaustive list, but these are some of the particular ones that seem to get aimed at some of the elder members of our community.
All right.
So, yes, the CRA tax scam. I'm phoning on behalf of CRA. You owe us money. You need to pay right now, and it's a high-pressure tactic. Another one is identity theft, and this is another one that gets a lot of shall we say, attention in the media. In particular, recent times in the last 5 years, we're hearing a lot more about identity theft. That's when someone gains personal information from you and then, in a way, it almost assumes your identity and starts racking up things against your credit. So,
lots of different ways to get that information, too, isn't there?
Exactly, and we'll talk a little bit about that.
Yeah.
So another one that often seems to be targeted for some of the elder members is fake inheritance. Get contacted, get a letter from a quote-unquote, perhaps a law firm or someone posing to be a lawyer based in often Europe, and it says, I represent someone, there's no heirs for this large estate.
Sure.
If you go 50-50 with me, I see you've got the same last name, we'll claim that you're the rightful heir, and we'll share the proceeds.
It's the Prince of Nigeria scam. Or something like that.
Yeah, well, some of those Nigerian gold ones have different incarnations now as well, too. We'll also talk a little bit about phishing scams. And this is a bit more of a broader term.
This is phishing with a PH.
Exactly. And it's a broader term, but really the main principal idea on this is that someone poses or sends communication posing to be a reputable company. Something like you get a letter from or an email from a computer company saying you have an account with us, which you may actually have, and say your password or your account's been compromised, please confirm. And guess what happens when you give that information? There's also, and unfortunately for particularly some of the elder members of our community, is romantic scams as well too. And this is more aimed at people that are recently widowed. And you see fraudsters will try to endear themselves as a way to try to build a relationship at first. It's often done online, and then you see requests for money as well.
That's really despicable, isn't it? It's really just taking advantage of a person at their weakest moment when they're grieving the loss of a loved one.
Well, and I think we should talk a little bit about why some of these are being targeted as well too. And some of the elder members of our community, they're being targeted because you're at a station in your life where you've accumulated assets, right? You have a bit of money. You're not like the 20-somethings that are, burdened by student debts and don't really have many assets. You tend to have a little bit more money, and fraudsters know this, and that's why they target more people that actually have assets.
They're also more trusting. I mean, the generation ahead of us is trusting by nature because they didn't grow up surrounded by these kinds of scams for the most part. I mean, it was rare for somebody to get taken back in the 70s or even into the 80s, and now it's a common occurrence, but they're still living that old sort of trust thing.
And that's very true. And there's also some physical elements on it as well, too. Perfect example is going to be when we do get older, let's be honest, one of the things that starts to go a bit is our eyesight. And this particularly relates to phishing scams, these ones that are designed to look like a reputable company. And some of these ones, these fake emails and the fake letterheads, they look really good.
They do.
And they can fool someone with perfect 20/20 eyesight. So when you have someone that has, strong reading glass prescription, sometimes it's a little harder to pick up some things that might indicate that it's a fake invoice. And, that's also a factor. And, it's kind of hard to say this, but, realistically as well, too, when we get a little bit older, members of our support community, our family and friends, they start passing away as well, too.
Right.
So we no longer have that support, those people to turn to and sort of say, hey, I got this in the mail. This seems kind of strange. What do you think? And if you don't have those same people around you to discuss, if your kids are living on the other side of the country, it's kind of hard to address this. And, that's, a fact and a reality as far as why sometimes people do get targeted if they are alone.
The sad reality as well is that it is so difficult for police in most cases to catch up to these guys because they operate using email, they operate using fake or temporary telephone numbers. It's just so darn hard to catch up to them. So it just grows and grows and grows, doesn't it?
It does. And, one of the things we'll talk about, and I'll get to that at the end, is kind of what happens if you are targeted and how to deal with it. But I think one of the things that I wouldn't mind moving into now is going to be about some avoidance, some steps you can take on this.
Yeah.
Now, there's no surefire way to protect against fraud and scams. I mean, it's unfortunately one of those things that is prevalent in our society. But as far as creating awareness, we can start to learn how to spot things a little bit easier and a way to build up some of those support networks to help prevent being so vulnerable towards it. Now, one of the first things that people often hear about is power of attorney. Now, main idea on it is to assist someone with their financial decision making. Either now in their life or even if even after they lose capacity, you can have an enduring power of attorney that continues on after the loss of capacity. Well, the whole idea on this and the help for someone getting a little bit up there in age and realizing, hey, I might start getting targeted by some fraudsters, is you then involve someone else in your finances that you trust and that you can talk to when you get one of these phishing emails or you get one of these letters from this supposed law firm. You can ask them and sort of say, well, look, I trust you to help me with my banking. I trust you to make financial decision making on my behalf. Should I send this $100,000 to this person in Nigeria right now, or should I talk to my power of attorney first? And I think that's a good first step, is having someone that you trust with your financial matters.
Now, I need a little more explanation on that because typically someone who has a power of attorney would be, I'm assuming here, a son or a daughter.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be. I mean, the whole idea with a power of attorney is, say, I'm going to grant a power of attorney to you, Gord. I'm going to say, you know what? For one reason or another, I'm having some difficulty completing either some of my financial decision making, or I know in the future I might have that. So I don't necessarily have to make it so it's effective right away. As in, I can give instructions to my law firm for it to be released.
Oh, okay.
So I say, Gord, I think I might have some trouble in the future on this. I recognize that, I will need some help. I'm fine right now, but, realistically, I understand that when it comes to doing banking in the future, if I end up having to be moved into a care facility, I'm going to need someone to help me selling my house as well, too. So with my power of attorney, I can say with express powers that you have, what financial decision-making you can make on my behalf. Now, you've also got your obligations as a fiduciary to act in my best interest, and you have to keep proper accounting records. But it's a way of saying it's a help, it's a protection, and it is an element of trust on that as well, too. So you see a lot of people will name children, but, sometimes our children either live in different countries, sometimes we don't have children, so we have to look to other people that can act. And sometimes someone our own age might not necessarily be the best decision, so we start looking perhaps to professional advisors.
Right.
Some people appoint their lawyers, some people appoint their accountants. If you've got a neighbor that you've built up a good close relationship over 20 years, you might trust them to that point. And there's ways you can put checks and balances on powers of attorney, but really trust is a key element.
The trust and the underlying understanding that the person who receives the power of attorney has a fiduciary responsibility, and that means the responsibility to act in your best interest. They can't just go out and start buying cars for themselves. The court would see through that in a minute. We're going to take a break and talk about some more efforts that you can take to protect yourself against the fraudsters and the scammers. Colin Flannigan returns right after these messages. Yeah, well, just during the break, we're talking about scammers and fraudsters with Colin Flannigan of FH&P and how common it is. I've just about fallen victim myself. My mother has been victimized just by the grace of God. She made that phone call to me, or it would have been it would have been tragic financially to her. So we talked about some ways to protect yourself. One of them is power of attorney. We just want to pick up before we finish up.
We were just finishing talking a couple things about the power of attorney, and you were just bringing up the question about, okay, powers that an attorney has in that situation. Can they go out and buy cars for themselves? Well, in the power of attorney document itself, you can set out what powers an attorney has.
You can specify exactly you're going to be able to do this, and that's all.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And if you want to have an attorney be able to transfer assets into their own name, such as buy a car for themselves and put it in their name, you have to be expressly clear in that power of attorney document that can happen. So it's a document that when properly drafted, it can help protect you.
Any other ways to protect yourself against these scammers, especially as you get older?
Yeah, and I mean, this is going to be one for the situation where, say, you started to get a onsetting of dementia. You've spoken to your doctor and it's happening. And if you've got some wealth, you might want to start addressing how you want to deal with it. And one of the ways you can deal with things is going to be through creating a trust. Now, the trust you set up by saying, I want this person to be the trustee, and these are the assets that are going to go into the trust or settle the trust. And then you also name the beneficiaries on it. Now, there's a number of factors that can be played into when a trust is appropriate, and it's quite an extensive conversation in all honesty. So I'm not going to get too in-depth on it on this point. I just want to bring it to people's attention as an option. And the basic idea is that it creates that safety protection barrier, that if someone does approach you with one of these scams or frauds, you might be the only trustee, or you might have a co-trustee, or you might have someone else as the trustee set up to make those decisions. So you go to your trustee and say, hey, I got this letter, and they want me to send this money to this person, and they're going to send me I'm using an advance scam where, say, if you pay us $10,000, we can complete this investment, and we're going to return you $10,000 or $100,000. Mm-hmm. You go to your trustee and say, hey, you know what? I want to send this $10,000. It's a great investment opportunity. It's going to return this amount so quickly. Your trustee, say you're using professional trust company, they're going to say to you, don't think this is a good idea.
Right.
So that's a perfect example on how your trust can be set up to help protect you in those situations, particularly when we know, hey, I'm coming to that situation in my life where I might get targeted.
Right.
And
any other ways of protecting yourself? This is all starting to sound pretty effective. Like this would be a good way to shut the door to some of these people.
Well, and I don't want to sound like I'm doing scare tactics as well, too, because, I mean, it's just one of those ones where we will need to be honest that it does happen to a lot of people. And there is a public body called the Public Guardian Trustee that, particularly when people start becoming a bit more vulnerable, it might be worth giving them a call and finding out what they might be able to do. Now, in any given situation, you've got different variants on what the Public Guardian Trustee might be able to do. So I can't say a blanket statement sort of saying, call them in this situation, because they've got different roles in different situations. So it's something worth keeping in mind, and particularly when we come to a situation in our lives when we start to lose capacity. You know, if we don't have estate planning documents in place, we don't have that power of attorney. We don't have, now I know I haven't mentioned it on this show, representation agreement. I'm sure Jim has talked about them before regarding healthcare decision making. There's something that's known as a committee, and that's under the Patients Property Act. So that is a situation where someone can get appointed when a particular individual has lost capacity. They can no longer make decisions on their behalf. They're particularly vulnerable. And someone could be appointed as committee of the state and or the person to make those financial decision-making or those healthcare decision-making powers. And this is one of those ones where I think perhaps maybe some of the younger listeners might want to be paying attention. This is when you see a loved one, whether it be your parents or whether it be your aunt or your uncle or even a neighbor that you've formed a good relationship, and you see that they are a bit more vulnerable and you see that perhaps maybe they have been a victim of fraud or that they have been approached, these are those conversations you might want to start having, whether or not can they still execute estate planning documents to help protect, or is this a situation where maybe you might want to mention something to the public guardian and trustee?
Interesting. That's certainly new information to a lot of people, including myself, that this body exists and that we can utilize them.
Yes, and I don't want to sound like I'm saying always contact them, because I mean, to be perfectly honest with you, they are an entity that is quite busy as well too. So there's only certain services that they do offer, but like I said, in different circumstances, sometimes it's worth having that phone call.
Right. Now, I do want to talk about, before we're done here, some of the things you should do if you've been victimized or if someone tries to victimize you. Are there any other protective measures someone could take?
Oh, absolutely. So one of the first things is if you are contacted, don't engage. Don't give personal information. That's the first thing. I mean, I know there's a lot of pressure tactics being used. Immediately try to stop the conversation, and if it's someone posing to be on behalf of a representative of an entity, end the conversation and call the proper telephone line to speak to someone that you trust and know that is a representative of that body. Because if you get the call in to you, sometimes you can't verify and know that that person truly is representing that entity.
Right. And
as soon as you start giving away personal information, that's when you're opening up the door for some of these people. So just be careful about that. And, the RCMP, sometimes they need to be involved in this. I mean, we are talking about criminal acts here, and they do have a anti-fraud center that deals particularly with these types of issues. So don't be afraid. Don't be ashamed. Sometimes you have to make that call as well, too, particularly if you have been the victim. It's not just being approached, but you actually have given away some money. It's worth making that call, because the more awareness we raise about who these fraudsters are, the better equipped the RCMP can be to deal with these people and try to address them. And, truthfully, sometimes it can be very difficult for them. But
shining a little light on this stuff, lifting up a rock and letting the sunlight in will usually do a lot to hopefully get rid of them in the end.
Yeah. A couple other quick things. I know we might be running a little short on time, but especially if we do give away any banking information. So a lot of these ones involve saying, give me your bank account or your bank details. If you've done that, don't feel embarrassed. Don't hide it. Contact your bank. Let them know that it happened.
Right.
And the same thing is if you've given away personal information, contact Equifax. They do have programs or different offers as far as dealing with identity theft. And if you've given away that information, it might be worth contacting them and seeing what options you've got there as well.
All good advice. Colin Flannigan with FH&P. If you have any further questions, especially about setting up the power of attorney and setting up a trust, I'm sure he'd love to help you. Contact Colin at FH&P. I always enjoy our time together, Colin. It's always interesting and informative. And thank you for this on behalf of my aging mom and all the other aging parents out there. Good job. Thank you.